All right, so I wanted to get started tonight by saying, first, acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Nanaimo people here in Nanaimo. And I'm very grateful to be able to do this from my home and that we all get to watch here in Nanaimo ladies with the benefit of being on the territory. Thank you very much for that. And also, I wanted to say that I am Alicia Boudreau. I'm going to be the host, and this is Judy Green. And Judy, I'd like for you to do your introduction. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm coming to you tonight, and thank you all for joining us. But I'm coming from Nova Scotia. I'm the only Atlantic Canadian contestant, and I live in Mi'kma'ki, which is the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, here in the greater portion of the Atlantic provinces. And here we are governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties. It's interesting that I actually was born in British Columbia in Princeton, BC, and I've lived and worked in 5 provinces across Canada. I have a background as an airframe technician in the Canadian Forces. I was one of the first women in the forces in that trade. I have my undergrad from Acadia University and my master's both in computer science from Carleton University, which I did while raising my son and working in high tech in Ottawa, where I spent about 10 years in that area. I've gone on to have started and run 4 different, very, very different businesses. I do a lot of coaching now, both business coaching, lifestyle coaching, but I work a lot with people with PTSD. So I have a strange collection of tools in my tool belt from a life well lived where I never planned to be in politics. So one of my teammates on my campaign team always says I'm an accidental politician, where politics chose me. I didn't necessarily choose it. And it really started with the IPCC report for many people in 2018. And it really lit a fire under me, realizing we didn't have as much time as I thought. I went from giving the talks heading towards extinction about the science of climate change, and I was giving those talks for XR, to running my very first time ever on a political campaign in the 2019 election. I had intended to run on someone else's campaign or work on someone else's campaign to at least have some experience, but that someone else didn't show up. So I stepped into that role. And we started with $36 in the bank account, no volunteers, and the previous candidate. We did not have a functional EDA. So between June and the election on the October 21st, we raised over $16,000 in a riding where half the population's at or below the poverty line. We tripled the vote, taking it to 12.69%. We came in 3rd, and we won the student vote. So it has been a crazy ride this last year and a bit, because it's been learning the whole time. And after that, I started to do an evaluation of how our campaign went, and then expanded that out to talk to other candidates about how their campaigns went. And there started to be a real pattern as to what was going on and what the experiences were. I had the opportunity to work with some grassroots Greens to put forward a proposal to federal council to bring in a transition director before we hired our executive director to fix some of the structural problems within the party. And they chose not to do that. And we're still struggling with those structural problems here a year later. So it's very interesting, but that's what my specialty is. My master's was in computer science, but it was multidisciplinary about growing and maintaining highly effective teams. I created a pattern language for helping teams move through the stages of team growth to get to the point where we're very highly effective and we're the most productive. And I've done a lot of that with the volunteer positions that I've had throughout my life. Rarely am I not volunteering on one or more boards at any point in time, including when I was in university, when I started the IEEE Society at Acadia University.
Wow.
We didn't have one previously. So yeah, it definitely had a lifetime of service, and I see the Green Party as just more of the same. and always just looking for what needs attention, and making sure that we pull the resources together to fix those problems.
Thanks so much, Judy, and thank you for all of the work you've done in the present and in the past. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. So the format for our event tonight is going to be that we have top 6 questions that as the EDA we put together. And then what we're going to do is we have members, constituents, on YouTube Live that are going to be feeding in questions as well. We have someone that's going to be, handing those to me, and then I will ask you those as well.
Excellent.
So should be fun. And I figured let's just get started. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Good.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's just jump right in.
I'm actually going to miss all of this. I love this. This is awesome.
Yeah. Oh,
you
good.
know, we've been doing this for months and months and months. We have one more month, and then we're not sure what we do after that. So it depends on whether we win or not.
Well, we can do this. We can keep doing this as long as you want.
This is awesome.
Okay. So first question then. CERB has been a critical emergency measure to help Canadians weather the COVID-19 pandemic. But some people say it has become a disincentive to low-income workers, so get Canadians going back to work. How do you see a guaranteed livable income being different? How would you implement a GLI in order to ensure that it is not a disincentive to work? And the third part of that is, what do you see as the main benefits of a GLI? So that's a 3-parter, but you can
This is a great question. I've done a tremendous amount of work with people who live at or below the poverty line. I'm an anti-poverty advocate and have done a lot of work with food security in our local area. And there's a lot of assumptions that are completely incorrect about people who are not working or who are on various forms of social assistance, which in each province, of course, has a different name and a different formula. But the reality is that all of those programs, the existing social safety net, are designed to be an incentive to work. So the income on them is less than what somebody would make with minimum wage. But the problem is that minimum wage hasn't kept up with the cost of living. It's about half of what it should be had we been on the same increase as housing and everything else since the 1960s. And so we have people who are living on, in West Nova, in Nova Scotia, 38% of what is considered a livable wage in Nova Scotia. That barely covers their rent. That's the reality. And there are disincentives to being able to do anything when you have no money to even cover your basic costs. And you're having to make the decision whether to have heat on in the winter or eat. And that's a very real reality for a lot of people, and people even on my campaign team. So it is, we really have to kind of step down from our privileged position of saying what other people's life experiences are in terms of their financial position, first and foremost. And we have to look at our systems in terms of whether our economy is there to serve the people, or if the people are simply there to serve the economy. Because there's this whole aspect of wages are kept low because wages are usually the largest cost for an employer. And so there is an automatic pressure to keep wages low, to keep costs low. And if the government allows that to stay low, well, then businesses are going to do that, because oftentimes they're struggling anyway. They're very small profit margin in a lot of cases. And so now we end up with a citizenry that is desperate, not being able to meet their basic needs, even with a minimum wage. Many people are working 2 and 3 and 4 jobs. The businesses have now started not having full-time wages, so they don't have to pay the benefits. And so people are left without those benefits, and then they're still having to do multiple jobs. So the whole system is really on the verge of collapse. It is not sustainable, period. Then you add COVID-19 on top of it all, and the government did the right thing. It made sure that there was money in the pockets of people, so they weren't being evicted, and they were able to feed their families in time of crisis. If there had been a guaranteed livable income in place already, that already has a shock absorbing aspect to a guaranteed livable income. and doesn't have the same pressures on the economy and on inflation as if we were to raise the minimum wage. If we raise the minimum wage, which is a cost for the business, then they are going to raise their costs, and it's very inflationary. But when we're looking at a social safety net where we are providing a guaranteed livable income, a base amount that will cover, your rent or a basic mortgage, food, the utilities, just the very basics of life, which is far less than what a lot of people are making. It gives you that financial foundation upon which to build. I like to say you can't pull yourself up by the bootstraps unless you have boots. Right. And if you are on the very low end, you don't have boots. You can't afford boots. And a good analogy is that even most of us know that if you buy a good pair of boots, it'll last you 10 or 20 years. Most people can't if they're a very low income, and over that 10 or 20 years, it actually costs them way more, multiples, than if they'd been able to pay it all at once. So there are just so many of those taxes, in a way, on being poor. And so what a guaranteed livable income does is it raises that or levels that playing field for everybody and allows people the flexibility to take on the shocks of living and just life experiences, like having a child and wanting to stay home. Those first 2 years is really, really important. Going back to school, caring for a loved one who might be ill, all of those sorts of things is now covered. It's also taking from a feminist perspective, it's now finally looking at the importance of the work that's done in the home, the unpaid work of a great many people, mostly women, in this country. And so it takes that into effect. So the whole dialogue behind, oh, you have to force people to work, I take exception to that. I truly do, because the reality is, and the stats from everywhere that a guaranteed livable income has been tried shows quite the opposite. It gives people an opportunity to take that step, to try something new, to maybe work. Someone who's disabled may not ever be able to work 40 hours a week, but our system is set up that if they even try a little bit and they fail, they've lost that social safety net. So why are they going to try? Because then they're left out on the street. They're not going to. But with a guaranteed livable income, they can try it. And if it works, and it can be flexible, it might be 1 week they can do a few more hours, the next week they can do more. And it is much more flexible that way. It is really is a flexible security for people. Now, when CERB came in, it was just an arbitrary $2,000 a month, which is wonderful for some people, but not nearly enough for others. You hear on the news that there are people in, say, Toronto, that $200 doesn't even cover their cost of their rent per month, $2,000. And $2,000 in Nova Scotia is enough to cover those basic costs. So it depends on where you are in the world. So the CERB is problematic in that way. The CERB also has the same problems that our current social safety net is that people are having to qualify. Doesn't matter how many rules you make, there's always going to be people who fall through the cracks. And I can name you half a dozen in my small social circle here who have fallen through the cracks of CERB because of that requiring people to fit into boxes. People don't fit into boxes. People are people and their lives are different, and they get to choose how to spend their money. They shouldn't have to have the government or anyone else dictating to them what they can or cannot spend money on. So there's that whole dignity aspect that will come with a guaranteed livable income that is absent in our current social safety net. So I could talk an hour just on this subject. So we should have had we should have had guaranteed livable income, which would have prevented all of this going through with CERB. CERB's costed us more than it would have cost us in the same period of time to have covered everybody in the country. People who are skeptics have to understand that we already have a form of guaranteed basic income for families with children in the child tax credit. That is a form of guaranteed basic income. as is our old age security. So what we're talking about with a guaranteed livable income is actually dismantling some of these other systems and making it more equitable across the board. And without having the enforcement aspect. So there's a lot of savings there as well as a number of savings that are external, in that the stats are showing us that in a community that has guaranteed basic income, the levels of crime go down and recidivism goes down, the levels of addiction go down, the rate of people staying in school and graduating goes up, and the overall lifestyle of the families goes up, and people are healthier. So you don't have the mental health, you don't have chronic issues as much, because people have access now to healthy nutrition and food. So the trick now is to transition from CERB into guaranteed livable income. And that's going to be a really tricky one, because if we do it only part way, still hanging on to those shreds of our broken social safety net, it will fail. We have to step into a well-designed, guaranteed livable income that covers everybody, and get away from this fallacious idea that we have to put people in boxes.
Right, right. And it seems like GLI accounts for much of the human experience.
It does, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's flexible enough that things we may not even have thought of, it will cover as well.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned addiction, and the next question actually flows nicely from that, in that it asks, so it's another three-parter. Apparently us as the PDA really like three-part questions. So, okay, so what is your stance on drug prohibition? Part one. Do you support decriminalizing or legalizing drugs in Canada? Part two. And part three is, what approach would you support and why?
Okay, so I think we have to look at our track record. It seems like we've lost the war on drugs. And really it is about addiction, and understanding that addiction isn't a failure of character, it is a medical condition. And we don't treat it that way. We treat it with police action and through the courts and incarceration, which actually costs us more than if we decriminalized opioids, especially, and had people get the help that they need, even putting them through the detox programs and will cost us less than it does to incarcerate somebody, and then they're not as likely to continue in that pattern because it needs to break the pattern of addiction. So it is, we've got police chiefs calling for this now, to decriminalize opioids. Look what's happening in BC right now. We absolutely need safe injection sites. The stats on that show clearly that it reduces the number of overdoses. Right now, it's a travesty what's going on in BC, and it really does need to be decriminalized there. And I think that that's kind of a nexus point. Granville Street in Vancouver, I've been down there many times, and the climate and everything, really, you have a really transient population there as well, which really makes it kind of a hot spot for addiction and homelessness, unfortunately. So we really need to look at the data, look at the programs that have been in place around the world, and take the best of them and develop a program in Canada so that we can actually be helping our citizens and not blaming them for being ill.
Yeah, that's very true. And stop treating it like it's a crime.
Exactly.
Be a person suffering with addiction. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. It's not a character failure or a crime. It is an addiction. It is a medical condition. And yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next question. Due to the pandemic, Canada's deficit has been growing. Mm-hmm. Is this a big problem in your view? Some mm-hmm. people think that Canada will have no choice but to bring in some form of austerity. Do you think that Canada can come out of this pandemic without needing to bring in cuts to programs?
No, if you follow the old style economics, you would say yes. But with modern monetary theory, that's not the case. And we have an added benefit in Canada in that we have the Bank of Canada that we can buy bonds from. And that has the ability to forgive those bonds in the future with no upward pressure on, again, on inflation. So it's always, the criticism has always been that modern monetary theory would be inflationary, quantitative easing would be inflationary, but the reality is that it isn't. We've seen it used a number of times, most notably in 2007 to 2009, and it was not inflationary anywhere in the world that it was being used. I do caution, though, that there is a fair amount of purchasing or borrowing from worldwide banks rather than from the Bank of Canada. And there we do have to be careful because there is interest that will be due on those. And they won't likely be forgiven at the same rate. Although there is some talk about, I think they call it, I can't remember what it's called, but it's when all the countries all owe each other money, and they kind of, it's kind of like a roulette where they pass the money around to everybody, and it ends up canceling out most of the debt worldwide. Can't remember the name of it. It's an interesting, fun little title for it. But that, I don't know that will happen, but it is a possibility, especially with the COVID-19, where it is a worldwide challenge. Every country is facing the same sorts of economic challenges. There is a lot of data and books that have been written on this. There's actually one on the deficit. I think it's, and it shows that deficits really aren't what we think they are. There's nothing to be afraid of. Like if you look at Japan, they run at a very, very high deficit to GDP, like astronomical. And they don't have inflation, and their country runs. It doesn't slow down. So there's a whole lot of things that we thought would happen. And the interesting thing about economics, and I started, like my undergrad started at St. Mary's University in the School of Business. So I've done 2 years of economics. Don't have a master's or a doctor's in it, but I do have some experience with it. Is that economics really isn't a true science, but it is more of a way of evaluating things that have already happened. So it's not really good at predicting what will happen, but it's really good at analyzing and evaluating what has happened in the past. So, I mean, there's a lot we can learn from it, but it's not a really predictive science. And even if you follow Keynesian economics, you know, he had a lot of cautions in his writing that we haven't followed. And if we look at it, he really was talking about what we're talking about now, which is modern monetary theory. So I wouldn't be, especially in the midst of a crisis, I wouldn't be too worried about it. But we do have to get things back under control once we're past this crisis and the climate crisis, and then need to pull things back under control. But we have to be careful that we really are looking at the most modern understanding of how money is used in our society.
Right. And so furthermore, then the next question ties into this again nicely. We're having nice segues here.
Oh, good.
Yeah. It's like we've done this before. Okay, so within the renewable energy crowd, there's been critique about wanting to continue sort of the perpetual growth model and just changing it to green growth, right? So do you think that we should have economic growth as the main goal for our economy, or should we be looking at a steady state economy or even a planned degrowth?
Actually, I think B and C.
Right.
And the reason for that is that we simply, I mean, nowhere in nature is there unfettered growth. You know, we live in a finite world, and it makes absolutely no sense that we are allowing growth beyond that. You know, every year, the date that we have used up our year's supply of resources on the planet gets earlier and earlier in the year. One of the models that I really like is the donut economic model, because it has that outer boundary of not growing beyond the capacity of this amazing planet to provide for all of us. But it also has that floor, that social equity floor, that ensures that everybody has their basic needs met, including clean water for our First Nations. But also, you know, the guaranteed livable income fits in there quite nicely. And a lot of our our platform planks and our policies fit nicely into the areas for the donut economic model, and it makes an easy way of describing what our world would look like. And it is absolutely a circular economy. So, many of our policies already are circular in that we are looking at having the manufacturers responsible for their end of life of their product and that sort of thing. We have to stop this mindset even of the consumer where they don't know where everything came from or what the ramifications were of what went into making that so cheaply, perhaps at the expense of people working for slave wages in other countries. And we have no idea where it goes once it leaves our house. And so we have to kind of take back that responsibility as consumers to understand that when we purchase something that may have been made overseas, and we are complicit in how people are being treated in their workplaces, as well as how those resources are being extracted by our choices. And that's the best vote that we have, actually, is to vote with our dollar, but let's do it with our eyes wide open and understanding the full cost. One of the things that I love that a few people have talked about now is actually having a carbon, kind of like a nutrition label. It's a carbon label. And so what it's doing is it's telling you what the full cost of that product is. So it looks at things like how much it costs to extract the materials, how much it costs to travel back and forth, because a lot of times we're exporting jobs outside of the country, and so we're sending those resources out to those cheap jobs, and then they're traveling back in. And so even all that travel, all of that carbon intensive activity is not being factored into what the true cost of that item is. And I think that if people knew what that was, they would make better choices. So it's yes. And I'm a big fan of the wellness economy. I had an amazing opportunity, kind of stumbled on this free seminar that I went to at Dalhousie University for 2 days, where I got to talk to the people who are the architects of the wellness economy in New Zealand, in Scotland, in Bhutan. And it was an amazing experience and really jives with what the Green Party's vision for the future is. And that's something I want to pursue more in the future as well.
So Judy, this isn't a planned question, but just for our viewers out there, can you give us a quick synopsis of what a wellness economy means, what that entails?
Sure. So a wellness economy isn't just about making a profit. The sole purpose of a corporation legally, and it is a legal entity, is to produce profits for the shareholders. That's it. There's no ethical aspect to that at all. And so a wellness economy really looks at instead of saying that a country is doing well economically based on GDP, which is simply the measure of how much is being spent. It doesn't say why it's being spent. So it could be because there's natural disasters and hundreds of thousands of people are dying in floods, but the GDP makes it look like that country's doing really well, when in reality it isn't. So it takes into account the wellness of its people, so the number of people who are on social assistance, the number of people or the illnesses, if people are having chronic illnesses, the number of people who graduate from high school and from university and college. I mean, there's just so many different aspects of it, and which is being tracked here in Canada as well. So it's not that we don't know about it in Canada, we're just not running our economy based on it. So right. It's, so it's just kind of an expansive model. So that allows for looking at the things that really matter in our lives, and not just that we're spending money.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but is it Bhutan that has the gross domestic happiness?
Yes.
As their,
yes.
As their model?
Yes,
right.
It's Bhutan. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's Bhutan. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next question. Some Indigenous groups in Canada have been on the front lines of resisting fossil fuel development, while others have embraced it and have even partnered with fossil fuel corporations, or rather want to buy into big projects. So what should the GPC's approach be in regards to respecting Indigenous sovereignty when some nations and groups decide to invest in LNG oil sands development or pipelines?
Mm-hmm. That's an awesome question, because it really illustrates how we don't fully understand the Indigenous political structure. You know, there's the colonial structure that was imposed on them, that is chief and council on the reserves. And then in some nations, there are also hereditary chiefs. Now in West Nova, like in Mi'kma'ki, they don't use the hereditary chiefs, but they do have a council of chiefs. But so the jurisdictions, for instance, in Wet'suwet'en, the jurisdictions for chief and council are just on the reserve, and the jurisdiction for the hereditary chiefs are all of the unceded lands, and the you know, the teachings and the keepers of the wisdom for the tribe. Now the problem is that our government doesn't really know which one to negotiate with. And so it will negotiate with one without understanding it also has to negotiate with the other because the jurisdiction is different. There's also very underhanded negotiation techniques being used. So basically, my understanding and speaking with people who were involved in some of these negotiations was that people in chief and council were basically told, we're going to do it anyway, so you might as well give us your blessing so that you'll get some jobs out of it. And that's very underhanded. And we have to stand up against that. But we need to have, you know, provide a space to ensure that both the hereditary chiefs and the chief and council have the opportunity to come to some sort of understanding within their community themselves. Ideally, for us who are a colonial, you know, we want to have that top-down organization, that hierarchical organization. It's hard for us to get our head around negotiating with people who don't organize in the same way. And so there's a real clash going on there. And a lot of it is all around even how our, well, I shouldn't say our because they're not ours, but the First Nations communities under the Indian Act, and I really hate that term, it still keeps them as wards of Canada. So they don't have autonomy in so many things. And first we have to provide a structure so that they have autonomy. But I think what really needs to happen is that we need to bring all of the nations that want to, a council of nations, have them come together and tell us what their organizational structure within Canada, what it needs to look like. Because I can guarantee that we don't have it in our heads. We don't have it in our way of thinking. And so it's not for us to create and then invite them to it. They have to have a voice to it. And in speaking to the previous chief here at El Sitcook, Bear River First Nations, he explained to me that, you know, many of the communities are still just trying to reclaim their knowledge, reclaim their sense of self that was stolen from them through the 60s scoop and through, you know, the residential schools and all the other atrocities that have been heaped upon them, and which has really ripped apart their sense of self and their ability to self-govern. Now, other nations are at a point where they can self-govern and absolutely should be coming forward. So there needs to be some structure that will allow people or communities to be able to come back into that. We've got over 600. So there's 600 different nations to kind of think that of what we're dealing with here. So we need to structure this Council of Nations in a way that isn't finite, a one-time deal, but that allows nations to join as they're ready to do so and have their voices heard. So there's all of this going on behind while pipelines are trying to be negotiated through, and they're using strong arm tactics and going ahead even against court injunctions and not following their own laws, which is, I really take exception to, is that picking and choosing which laws you can choose. Also, our current Canadian government is absolutely disingenuous. We don't need any more commissions on anything Indigenous. We need to follow the recommendations in the report on reconciliation on the missing and murdered Indigenous women and UNDRIP. Full stop. Those need to start being acted on now. And stop taking decisions back to court and appealing it. We're wasting taxpayers' money in doing this. We're losing the respect and trust of the communities by doing that. It is untold harm that we're doing by taking these decisions back to court. We have to own up to, we live in a colonial society. It sucks, and we have to fix it, because right now it's not helping anybody, and it's allowing oil and gas companies to force things through that have no fiscal support for them at this point in time. You know, oil and gas has no business case where it's ever going to come back to be sustainable in our lifetime, if ever. So we really need to be working hard on doing the transition, but it has to be equitable, and it has to include First Nations.
Really. And it seems like the foundations are cracked, and
Totally.
platitudes from the government, they're not.
That's so, right. Exactly. Exactly. And it was interesting. I had asked at a panel on environmental racism, how we reach out into First Nations, Black and Indigenous communities, because, you know, every board I've ever sat on always wants to be diverse. And we have all, you know, done everything we could from our colonial mindset to make it a safe place for people to come. But we really didn't get how unsafe the colonial structure is for people until quite recently. And if you think about it, we're talking like 200-400 years, you know, depending on what group we're talking about, of being lied to, being the families ripped apart, untold violence. We see it almost every day now in the media, where another Black person gets shot, where a white person in the same circumstance wouldn't be, there wouldn't even be a weapon drawn by the police officer. So, I mean, these sorts of systemic racism is really endemic in our population now and needs to be rooted out, and we need to stop that before anyone's going to feel safe. So we really need to educate ourselves. We need to make safe spaces, and we have to have open dialogue and learn from each other.
So, can you still hear me, by the way? I had to, okay, perfect. Yes. I had to unplug this mic. I'm getting told that it is trash. The sound quality is trash.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, so on the topic of racial violence and everything that's going on, all of the tragedies that we're seeing in the media. So the next question pertains to that. So in the wake of the death of George Floyd, international protests have since called for defunding of the police to address systemic racism and police brutality in general. However, the term defunding the police means different things to different people. So do you support the idea of defunding the police to some capacity? And if so, what would you be calling for as leader of the Green Party?
Excellent. You know, this is the first time I heard that term, defunding the police. I was kind of taken aback, but like, don't we need police to keep us safe? And that's inevitably the first reaction that people have when they hear that term. I think in some ways that the term isn't the best, but in other ways it gets that reaction. So maybe it's doing exactly what the authors wanted it to do. Because then we dig deeper and we realize that the way our policing is working in Canada, well, North America and beyond, is not serving our population. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't good police officers. There's some amazingly good and decent police officers, but the problem is that the ones who aren't being held accountable, and it starts to creep into being systemic racism when they behave a certain way. And I kind of liken it to, because the training isn't great. The training is all about dealing with criminals, not with dealing with people. And so if you have in your mind that a criminal looks a certain way, a certain color, a certain mannerism, a certain way of speaking, then every time you come across a criminal, you're going to react to them the same way. So that's part of the problem. Another is that we want our police officers to feel safe, so they have a weapon, but that's like the only tool that we give them. So you know, if you give the only tool somebody has is a hammer, everything's going to look like a nail. Right. So if you're taught that everybody's a criminal, then you're going to be treating everyone like a criminal. So we have to be looking at some of the policing models that are really community-centered, that are preventative. Our whole society is all about fixing things after it's happened, rather than being preventative. So we need to have a total shift to preventative. Part of that is a guaranteed livable income to help look at the problems within the communities that are having the worst statistics in terms of violence, and really look at what we can do to lift everybody up with the social determinants of health, to ensure that they have other options rather than turning to crime. There's always going to be a segment of the population that will do violent crime, and we will need police in order to, like a rapid strike force, to be able to deal with that. But we also need to be looking at, if we're asking the police to go out on a wellness call, well, let's have a team that goes out with them. You know, somebody who's in de-escalation, somebody who can, understands mental health issues, and just the skills that we need to actually deal with somebody who's in a mental health crisis or distress, rather than going in and trying to treat them like a criminal, because that's the only tool you have. And even if that's in the middle of the night, yes, we have to make that commitment to do so. So I see not a drastic overnight defunding, but I do see there needing to be a complete overhaul of how we do policing, and perhaps get to a point where, like in other countries, that our normal police officers who are patrolling our streets are not carrying weapons. They don't need to. We need to demilitarize our police. There's no reason that any police force in Canada needs military-style weapons, and except for a few elite strike forces that can be brought in if that's necessary. But you see more and more, like in Halifax, they had approved the armored carriers, and there was such an outcry from the population, from the area, that they've actually canceled that order, and instead of just reabsorbing that money that was allocated, they've used that money to put into community policing, and I applaud them for that decision. And then there is the issue of the RCMP, which is a little bit different, because the RCMP is an organization that was originally designed and created to deal with the Indian problem. And again, I don't like that word, but that's the reality of it. And that's what it was built on. And unfortunately, sometimes organizations become so rife with the wrong way of thinking that you can't incremental or otherwise change that. And the example I'll use is the airborne unit. In the Canadian Armed Forces, the airborne used to be the most elite top force, until they really went off the rails in Somalia. And it was determined that there was just no recovering it. So they actually disbanded the airborne unit, and they created a completely new one, the Joint Task Force. We may well have to do something like that with our RCMP. You know, the fact that the RCMP commissioner could not even on 2 and 3 opportunities to speak on the issue of systemic racism in their organization really proved that she had no idea what it meant. Never mind had any programs that were looking at it. So it may well be that organization will have to be disbanded. So there's many different facets. So the defunding, for me, defunding of the police would be stopping all of the military escalation, putting more money into the social determinants of health and community policing, and that will naturally reduce the amount of funding and operational requirements for the existing police forces, and need to look at restructuring the RCMP to be something completely different.
Right. Right. And in Nova Scotia, it's been, quite a topical issue as well, because of the racialized street checks that have happened for a time. Yeah.
And they're still happening. They're not
still
supposed
happening.
to be.
Yeah.
They're still happening. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay. So next question. The Green Party has a policy to reduce the voting age to 16. Some people are worried that teenagers are too irresponsible and unrealistic to have that responsibility. What are your thoughts on this issue?
Have they been to the schools and talked to the kids in the civics classes? These kids have more on the go than most adults do. They understand and they're learning and they want to know more and they want to have a voice. I absolutely, we need to be lowering the voting age to 16. And again, the data shows us that if students go straight from school and then at 16 start voting, they will vote for the rest of their lives. If there's a period of time between school and starting to vote, many of them won't. So if we want more participatory democracy, we need to lower that voting age. That was one of the funnest things during my last campaign, was going into the schools and talking to the students. They had awesome questions. And I'll share one that I just absolutely love. This young fella in grade 4 in Yarmouth asked me, he says, and bless his heart, he says, what's the first thing you're going to do when you go to Ottawa? And so thinking of the age that he was, I said, well, the first thing I'm going to have to do is make friends, because you have to work across party lines and you have to get people on your side if you're going to get things done. And he understood that, because that's what you have to do in class. Yeah, exactly. But he was asking, like, he was already thinking ahead. So awesome questions from the students. We need to get them engaged, love to get them engaged in our campaigns, get them signed up as Young Greens at 14, get them involved. I think that's one of the things that we had challenged with in the last election, was that we had so many students marching in the streets, and many of us were marching with them in support, but that didn't translate into votes. And it didn't actually even grow the vote across the board. So it wasn't even that they were voting at another party, they just weren't voting. So we have to really make it clear that, yes, we need to be marching in the streets, and we need to be raising awareness in the population, but we also have to be working within politics, so without and within, in order to actually get things done, because it's in the House of Parliament that things get changed, and those ideas and those concepts get translated into action, and they can be a big part of that.
Right. And it's interesting, because we have a preteen who is on the EDA by the name of Oliver. And I would hazard a guess that he is more responsible than myself. And I'm 27.
Yeah, exactly.
So age is not always a good determination of responsibility.
This is so true.
Right. Okay. So next is, we actually have a question from the chat. Yes, let me look here. So Patricia Grand asks, I wonder what personal/family arrangements she, as in Judy Green, yourself, would have to change to be the Green leader. Example, Courtney Howard and her family were prepared to move to Ottawa.
Well, for myself, there's just my husband and I at home now. Our son is 37 and we have 3 grandchildren. They, of course, don't live with us. But my husband provides an oasis here for me. He's not a political creature, and that allows me a safe space to not get caught up in it all the time. So we've already talked about this, and I would probably get a small place in Ottawa. We've been married 38 years, and while he was in the military, he traveled on the ships, attached posted to the ships for months at a time. We didn't even have contact. This is before the internet. There were no phones for 4 or 5 months at a time. So being able to talk to each other every night would be absolutely dreamy compared to what we've done in the past. So we've been practicing for this. We'll be good.
Right. Compared to the carrier pigeons that you used to have to send to each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I would imagine that you wouldn't bother even running if you weren't willing to go to Ottawa anyhow. So.
Exactly.
Okay. So another question that the EDA had put together, and we have 8 minutes left here. So just probably a few more, but what do you see as the most important foreign policy issues facing Canada today? What are your thoughts or positions on these issues?
Okay. I think number one is we have to stop being aggressors in foreign countries. Canada identifies as being peacekeepers, and being a member of the military, I can speak for a great number of our military members as well. We were proudest when we were being peacekeepers, not so proud when we're being pulled into conflicts, internal conflicts in other countries. that oftentimes turn out to be incorrect information that we base the decision to go in on. And it's just not who we are as Canadians. I think that we need to be looking at foreign policy based on basic human rights, and not doing as much, or get away from, if there'll be a transition, but get away from doing business with countries that don't adhere to certain basic rights. And when a decision is made that there needs to be sanctions based on a type of behavior in one country, then we have to ensure that we apply that same sanction to other countries that are doing the same sorts of things. So if one country is annexing, which is against international law now, you're not allowed to gain land by military aggression. So when one country does that, there needs to be sanctions on that country. But if another country, just because they're a high value trading partner, we can't give them a friends and family discount. They have to have the same results, consequences, right, of their actions. Exactly. Kind of think about it as having multiple children. You have to treat them all fairly, right? So we have to do that with international policy.
Right.
And that means we have to get all the parents on the same page. Yes.
No, that's a very good point. Having a an umbrella that where everyone falls under the same, with the same treatment. Yeah.
And that works really well for us as Greens, because we already filter our policies through the litmus test of our 6 core principles, right? So we're just adding basic human rights as another litmus test upon which we base our policies on.
Okay. We have another question from Shane Wilson. So in the chat, he asks, can you please speak to the environmental elephant in the room? What's the plan? And then he ended it with a smiley face.
Okay, the environmental
elephant in the room. So I'm assuming climate change.
Oh, okay.
Climate change, yes, and loss of biological diversity. And
yes, exactly. And it's so funny because it doesn't matter who we talk to and how many of these we do, rarely does climate change come up in a talk, because we're all Greens, right?
Right.
Well, absolutely. Climate change and loss of diversity is the #1 biggest threat to the world right now, and we have to take action on that. The trick right now, and the truth is that if we don't fix that problem, nothing else is going to matter. But on the doorstep, for the person that you're standing in front of, especially somebody who's been affected by COVID-19, they're looking at survival right now. So there's something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's a pyramid. And looking at things existentially outside of yourself, far into the future, is quite high on that pyramid. Right now, most people are at that base level where they're looking at security, safety, roof over their head, being able to feed their family, having a job through all of this. So in many respects, the oil field workers are feeling that too, because they're feeling like the rug's being pulled out from underneath of them. So we really need to be taking our really robust climate change policies and presenting them as solutions to the issues that people are feeling right now. So for an oil field worker, we'd be talking about we want to have a clean transition for you to make sure that you don't fall through the cracks. And that one of the things that we're going to do is to do an east-west energy grid, where your construction skills will absolutely be needed. And we're going to be retrofitting all federal buildings. And that's going to be a lot more jobs as well. So more jobs in clean energy in doing that than we have existing in oil and gas right now. And really looking at what the issue is with the person that's standing in front of you. Because we can stand out there and have all the facts that we want in the world about climate change, but people are not going to listen to that if it's not something that's directly affecting them. There's a thing that you learn in business and marketing is people do not remember what you tell them. They remember how you made them feel. And we need to learn that as Greens, because the other parties do. They use fear really, really well. And so we don't want to be using fear, but we need to be eliciting an emotional response in people of feeling that, yes, you know, I have confidence in them, they have integrity, and they have a solution to my problems that are most important to me right now. And all of our Mission Possible solutions, all of the things that are going to solve climate change, all have a different aspect that they can be sold as well, depending on who you're talking to. So especially if you're talking to somebody who's very conservative, every single one of those, I can spin it so that it is from a perspective that is important to them. You know, things like guaranteed livable income actually costs us less in the long run than our current broken social safety net. You know, decriminalizing opioids, that will actually cost us less than incarcerating an individual. So you have to kind of look at how we're talking about it, still do the research, still do the solutions that are going to fix the carbon crisis, but we have to look at it and sell it in a way that Canadian voters are going to feel it's going to have a direct effect in their lives.
Right. And in turn, we have a more healthy, robust, and resilient population. Exactly. As a byproduct of the solutions you mentioned.
Exactly. And I'd also like to add another elephant in the room that often gets talked about or overlooked with climate change is overpopulation. So that's really the one I thought he was talking about at first, because that is a part of the argument about climate change. But the stats all show that if you provide a basic income, education, the more educated a woman is, the fewer children that she will have, and the fewer children her children will have. So, and you give a woman the full control over her reproductive health, and she will have the right number of children for her family. Women who don't have that autonomy and don't have that level of income will likely have more children. So right. by looking after the rights of women, we're actually addressing that naturally in a humane way.
And that was the I'm a Girl Foundation, or I'm a Girl campaign, was based off of that.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and Shane actually had a follow-up question to that. So blue hydrogen, question mark, parentheses, for the oil and gas sector, question mark.
Okay, so hydrogen is interesting because there's multiple different ways that you can create hydrogen. Some of them actually take more energy than you actually get out of the resulting hydrogen, which of course is not the right way to go. Some use LNG in order to produce hydrogen. That's definitely not the way to go. So we have to look at some of the green hydrogen options, and there's more and more coming out. There's an interesting one in Saskatchewan where they're actually looking at reclaiming from the methane from the tailings ponds of the oil and gas, and they haven't gone through a full life cycle yet, but we're really watching it closely because it has a lot of potential to be a way of cleaning up the existing tailings ponds and creating a green hydrogen option. So it's kind of a two-for in that case. So yeah, we do have to be careful, and I think you know, as much as we didn't like Michael Moore's latest documentary there, the points there were good in that we have to be careful not to greenwash the green energy solutions, that we have to look at the full cost accounting of these solutions, and where things are dicey, like in some of the battery technologies, we have to be really careful that we just improve that the technology around that as rapidly as we can to make that whole process a whole lot cleaner and greener.
Definitely. So this is our last question, as it is now 7:32, and you have really nice, effective, concise questions, but I think this will be the last one. So, okay. So beyond winning more seats, what is the most effective way for the GPC to affect the national conversation on critical issues facing Canada?
Very good. Very good question. Yeah, we definitely need to win more seats, but we also have to be more green across Canada, which will also help us be winning more seats. You know, I would love to see in every single riding doing town halls on topics that are important, especially the ones like proportional representation or climate change that you really can't cover in 5 minutes on somebody's doorstep. this is some of the work that we can be doing in between elections that will help team build and build our EDAs and get our greenness out into our communities, showing that we're providing a service and that we care about our communities and care about the dialogue and the discussion about what's the best solutions. And that will also help us grow because we will end up having people who will join us through that process as they begin to trust us. And it will also help get the message out in a very organic way. And it helps us to build our teams in all of the skills that we need, the marketing skills, the copywriting skills, presentation skills as we go forward. And just, writing op-eds in your local, those of us who have some skills in writing, write some op-eds in your local newspapers, look and make connections with the alternative media, do interviews with them on these topics, and really get the word out in between the elections in an authentic way. And that really allows us to do it authentically because, when you're in the election period, there's always this oh, you're just doing that to get elected. People have lost
ingenuity,
trust.
yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
People have lost trust in politicians. So one way we can do politics differently is actually to be of service in our communities.
Okay. So, Judy, that was a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and to give our viewers a chance to get to know you and your stance on all of these different issues. Also, do you have any last closing statements that you'd like to say for our viewers?
Sure. Thank you very much for hosting this. This has been fabulous. I'm going to miss all of these when they stop. So we're going to have to find a way to keep on connecting, breaking down those silos, keep connecting across different EDAs, learning from each other, having guest speakers on. We really need to be doing that. All of us are getting so comfortable with Zoom now in a weird backhanded way. COVID-19's given us this gift. It's something that I think we need to take forward into our campaigns within our own ridings, but keeping that connection with Greens all across Canada. Another thing that I really want to do is a mentoring program especially with young Greens, but with Greens who have been in the party for a while and have institutional knowledge, who would like to partner up with perhaps another EDA or a young Green and share that knowledge and bring everybody up together. I'm really excited about that. We're getting a lot of feedback from that. It kind of popped out early on in the campaign as, oh, that would be fun. And it's really grown since then. I'd really like to see us also connect with global Greens. We have Greens elected, global Greens in 80 countries around the world. I would love for us to have our EDAs or some of our EDAs in Canada, paired with EDAs in other countries and learning from each other. I think that would be so exciting. So there's a lot of projects and programs that we can continue on a grassroots level going forward, of course, with the approval of federal council. And we are looking forward to that. As you may know, we're coming up to a deadline for nominations and for fundraising. So really, we need to know today and tomorrow for our fundraising to raise that last $20,000. I know there's at least 3 of us, possibly 4, that are struggling to get to that level. And if you want to see us on the ballot, we need all the help that we can get. There is still some nominations that we require. And for myself, as of last Friday, I was still needing a few in the north and in Quebec and in central Canada. So if you know Greens who haven't done the nominations or didn't know we have to do a second round of them, please get the word out because I'm not the only one, and people can nominate 1 or all 9 of us in this second round, but we have requirements of 20 in each of or 5 of the 6 regions. And we're all working on getting those done as well. So any help you can reach out for, all of us would love people from all across Canada to be working on our campaigns. I'm quite happy we've got 4 provinces represented on my campaign, and my campaign is probably the smallest campaign of anyone out there. So we've lost a few people due to illnesses and such, and our campaign manager actually got elected as the the regional representative for Nova Scotia. So she's forgiven.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
She's forgiven for stepping down from the campaign because she's doing awesome work now, Leah Renault, so on federal council. So yeah, just reach out to myself, my campaign, others. My website is www.judyngreen.com, and you'll find all of the information that you need right there.
Perfect. And just to let everyone know too, this recording is going to be available on our Nanaimo Ladysmith EDA YouTube channel to share with any friends who may have missed it, couldn't tune in at the time. And the next meet and greet is Tuesday, September 1st with David Murner, and we'll be sending out all the info in our weekly newsletter. So thanks again, Judy. That was fantastic. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and good night. Good night, Judy.
Bye.